Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this video is going to be all about road trip planning, and I wanted to share a few of my tips to help you plan an epic road trip and share some of the things that we've picked up over the years from the road trips that we've done and a few things that help your road trip go that bit more smoothly. I'm sure you know by now how much we love doing our road trips, especially up to the Rockies like Banff, Jasper and Yoho. It's so amazingly beautiful up there. We did our Banff road trip last year, and we're actually heading up to Jasper again in September in a few weeks time, so I'm very excited for that. It's one of my favourite places ever, and we've been planning over the last few days, so I thought while that everything's fresh in my brain I would put this video together and hopefully it'll be useful for you guys if you're planning a trip for yourself. Okay, so I have compiled a bunch of tips and I've got them written down, so that's what I'm looking at because I can't remember this much information. So tip number one is to start by planning out your route, and this is normally my starting point. So I will open up Google Maps and I'll obviously put in the starting destination, which for us is Vancouver, and the final destination, which for this trip will be Jasper, and then Google Maps will show you the distance and how many kilometers or miles it'll be. It'll show you how long the journey will take, and it will normally present you with a couple of route options. Now for the Vancouver to Jasper trip, it will either tell you to go via Whistler and Lillooet, or it will tell you to go via Kamloops and via the Coquihalla Highway, and that's the route that we're going to take. We're actually going to split up the journey and leave the night before, so we're going to stay in Kamloops overnight, and that will break up the journey a little bit. But another thing to look out for is things like ferries and toll roads. So depending on where you're going, and I learned this when we went down to Olympic National Park back in February, sometimes unless you specify to avoid toll roads or like ferry routes for example, it'll often take you on that route. So when we were planning our Washington trip, at first I was like, wow, it only takes like 4 hours, this is amazing. And then when I delved a bit deeper into the route, it was basically taking us on the ferries, and we didn't really want to travel by ferry. We wanted to be a bit more flexible with timing, and so once I selected the option to avoid the ferry routes, it kind of redirected us. The journey ended up being longer because obviously we weren't crossing over by ferry, but that is something to be mindful of. Look a bit more into it, look into where the route is actually taking you. Sometimes Google Maps will do like weird things, so it's always good to double check. Also a good idea to mark out on a map where the main gas stations are. With certain road trips, you know, there might be sort of great expanses of distance where you don't have gas stations, and so it's good to plan ahead just so that you're not kind of in a sticky situation and caught without any gas stations. And another thing to do is a few days before you travel, and also on the morning of the day that you travel, is to look at local news reports. So in BC it's called Drive BC, and in Alberta it's called 511 Alberta, and those are basically just the road reports, and it will tell you whether there's any road closures, if there's any big accidents, and this is always really useful to look at. Okay, so the next step in my road trip planning is researching the destination and deciding what activities that we want to do. So we actually did this yesterday, so we made a big long list of all the cool lakes around Jasper, of different hikes that we could do, of like waterfalls and scenic viewpoints and great spots for night photography and all that kind of thing. And we wrote a big long list, and then we went back in and started researching each destination or activity and working out whether or not we actually wanted to do it. And then what we will do next, which we haven't actually done yet, but what we'll normally do next is basically print out a map of Jasper or of the destination that we're going to, and make a mark on the map of all of these places. It can be sometimes quite difficult to choose between which lakes to visit or which hikes to do, but logistics kind of always end up ruling, and so I find it really helps to mark down on a map where all of these places are, and then you can start to figure out a bit of an itinerary. You can figure out what to do on certain days. Like, it really doesn't make sense to visit a place over here and a place over here and a place over here all in one day. You may as well kind of just be a little bit more intentional with the route that you choose, so that you're not kind of coming back and forth. So you can save a bit of gas, you can save time, which is really like the most sort of valuable thing when you're road tripping, and it just helps to be practical when you're planning out where you're going. We'll normally have a lake day, we'll have like a road tripping day where we just hit a bunch of different spots and we just kind of enjoy the open road. So it's kind of up to you how you do it, but that's kind of what we find to be really useful. So another thing that's very helpful is choose your vehicle wisely. Now, this is a little bit more difficult if you own your own vehicle, but if you're renting, then I would suggest getting something a little bit bigger if you can, especially if a few of you are going to be in the car. Definitely get something a little bit larger. You want to have a bit of space. You're going to be in the car for a very long time. If you're camping, you definitely want a bigger vehicle because you're obviously going to have all of your camping gear. We usually rent from Enterprise. There's an office really close to our house. I find that the rates are good, but kayak.com is a really good website to look at. It's like a comparison site, and that will compare prices of lots of different rental companies, and also look at the location as well. I find that sometimes it's cheaper to rent from Vancouver Airport. If there's a lot of demand, like in the summertime, sometimes it's cheaper to rent from there, but it just kind of really depends on time of year. So kayak.com is a really great option for car hire. When we do our trips, we'll normally go for an SUV. I like to have a lot of space. I like to take a lot of stuff, which is one of the beauties of road tripping, because you can literally take whatever you want. And the car normally ends up being like my office and my changing room and my makeup studio. I do everything in the car, so we quite like having something a little bit bigger. The thing that I would suggest doing is booking your accommodations as early as possible. Now, I mentioned in my travel planning video about booking.com. I've used booking.com for years, like maybe 5-6 years, and it's just a really great site for finding and booking accommodation. And what I like most about it is that you get free cancellation. So with not all, but most properties will offer free cancellation up to like 1 or 2 days before the travel date. So when we book our trips, especially if it's in high season, I'll normally just book something as soon as possible, and then if our plans change or if we decide to stay somewhere different, we have the option of cancelling, but we've already got something booked in just in case everything kind of gets booked up. With camping, you want to try and book your camp spots as early as possible, especially if you're traveling in the summertime and if it's really busy. Certain campsites too, some of them are like reservation only, some of them are walk-in only, some of them are a mix of the two, so it kind of also depends where you're staying. But if you're camping and you want to have the best camp spot, then try and get there as early as possible. Try and get set up in the daylight, because it's just way easier than getting set up at night time. But yeah, it definitely helps to have your accommodation sorted and kind of have a good idea of that as early as possible. And obviously things are a lot cheaper the more far ahead in advance you book as well. Okay, so next tip is to be realistic with your timings. Now, it's very easy to be very, very optimistic and look at a map and the map say it takes 9 hours and you're like, oh, okay, it's going to take 8.5. Like, things always take longer than you anticipate when we're planning our route. I'll normally tack on an extra hour or hour and a half, just because you never know with traffic. If you stop and get coffees, that adds an extra 15 minutes on. You might stop and get some gas, you might stop and get dinner or lunch or whatever. You always end up spending more time than you anticipate. So just try and be realistic with your timings, just so that you're not like rushing around, because you don't want to be rushing around. You want to enjoy every minute of it. Okay, so next tip is to make sure that you prepare your car and you have all the things that you would need kind of in case of emergency. Now, a spare tyre is so essential to have. Another thing that's really useful to have is a proper map. If you're in somewhere like the Rockies, obviously you don't get signal everywhere. Google Maps and like your sat nav, whatever, might not work. So it always helps to have a real map with you. Another thing that's useful to have is water. Now, even if you're not camping, I would highly recommend taking a few big jugs of water with you, just so that you've got drinking water on the way. We normally take a few of these. These are like our camping ones, or we'll buy the really big ones that has like a little tap, which is really useful just for like filling up water bottles for camping. And water is just like such an essential thing to have, and that way you're not relying on going into like cafes, you're not relying on like buying lots and lots of bottles of water. Another thing that's useful to have is spare change. I know we live in a very cashless world. Spare change is always useful to have, especially at things like toll booths. Trash bags are also really useful to have when you're road tripping, when you're essentially living in your car for like a week. Things get messy and dirty very quickly, so try and keep everything tidy. Try to keep rubbish in a rubbish bag and keep emptying out the vehicle, and we'll always make sure that everything has a home, just because like you're constantly in and out the car and it's very easy to lose things. It's also easy to panic and feel like you've lost something. What else? Oh, snacks. Snacks are probably like the most essential road trip item, to be honest. Yeah, take lots and lots of snack with you. We like to take things like nuts. We will take crisps, maybe a little bit of chocolate, maybe some like gummies and like, you know, Haribo for when we're really flagging and we need a little bit of a sugar boost. So take a variety of snacks, because I feel like you just always get super hungry when you're on a road trip. So yeah, snacks are a must. Another good thing to have is a spare key for the vehicle if you have one, just in case you end up locking the key inside the car. It's obviously useful to have a spare key. Toilet paper, always essential. Hand sanitizer, even more essential nowadays when, you know, we need to be sanitizing all the time. First aid kit, that's also really useful to have when you're on the road all the time. You know, plasters, antiseptics, some bandages, just in case you need that kind of thing. USB battery packs are also super useful, and I love the this is an Anchor one. This has like 2 USB ports, and it's like super lightweight, and I can get about 8 iPhone chargers out of this. So these are really, really good, even more essential when you're camping. And make sure to take a USB charger as well for your phones. Okay, so another tip is to make sure you have good music and good playlists. This should not be an afterthought. This is something that you should make sure you plan before you go, because you're going to be listening to a lot of music. So make sure you've got plenty of playlists just for like every mood. We'll normally have maybe 3 playlists, and make sure that if you use like Spotify, make sure you make them available offline, because if you're somewhere more rural or in the mountains, then you won't always have signal. So if you make the playlists available offline, then you'll be able to play them even when you don't have signal, and same applies to podcasts. Another thing that is really useful to do is take lots of food with you. And I did mention about taking lots of snacks, but take some real food too. And we'll do this even if we're staying in a hotel. We will normally take a cool box for the journey there. We'll make a tuna pasta bake, or we'll make a quinoa salad, or something that we can eat on the way. And we'll usually take some sandwich food as well, so like cheese, bread, knife, maybe some peanut butter and filling and that kind of thing, just so that we can make sandwiches on the go, because we want to make the most of all the time that we have. We don't want to be sitting down for lunch every day. We want to be out on the road, but we also don't want to be hungry. So it just really helps to have like decent food with you while you're on the road, and also just in case you're in a small town and things close early and you don't get there in time, it's good just to have food with you just in case. Another thing that's really useful to do is research weather and just be a little bit more prepared again than you think you should be. So if you're traveling in the winter time, make sure you take some de-icer for the windscreen. Make sure you take a couple of blankets just in case you get stuck somewhere, you have to sleep in the car. Make sure you've got things like a torch, and make sure that all your fluids are topped up, like your windscreen fluid and all that kind of thing, just so that your car is ready for the journey. And take lots of clothing options. As I said before, like the beauty of road trips is that you can take as many things as you want. So I do that, and I will always take lots and lots of outfit changes, but especially if you're going to the mountains, the weather changes so quickly. Between like Banff and Jasper and Lake Louise, the temperature difference can be really significant. Like in Lake Louise, it's usually about 10 degrees colder than it is in Banff, even if you're visiting in the summertime. Obviously in the morning before the sun comes up, it's also a lot colder. So it doesn't really matter what season you're traveling in, make sure you just take a range of clothing. Even if you're traveling in the height of summer, it could still snow at elevation. When we went to Banff and Jasper 3 years ago when we did our road trip, it was like 25 degrees on the Monday, and I was wearing cute little summer dresses, and it was boiling hot. And literally by Thursday, we camped out, we woke up, and there was snow everywhere, and it was like -10 degrees, and the weather literally dropped 30 degrees in the space of like 3.5 days. It was insane. And fortunately, we had anticipated that, so we did take our winter coats, we took blankets and all that kind of thing. But it is a little bit deceptive, and that's the thing with the mountains. You never know what the weather's going to do, so definitely take more clothing than you think you'll need. Take lots of layers. Make sure you take a big puffy jacket, especially if you're camping. You're going to want a nice big jacket that you can put on when you're just, you know, going to bed, when you're out at night time, and things like a hat, gloves, scarf, all of those things are all really, really useful to have, because the thing with the weather is that you never quite know, do you? Okay, so my final tip is just to be flexible. The great thing about road trips is that you have the most flexibility. You can literally go wherever you want, whenever you want, and yeah, you can just kind of wing it and play it by ear. So as much as we like to make itineraries and we will plan what we're doing on each day, we also like to leave a lot of room for spontaneity, for, you know, random stop-offs, for random viewpoints, and you always end up finding things that you don't expect, even if it's a field full of elk. We've had that before. We've ended up spending an hour sat at the side of the road watching elk in a field. There are experiences like that that you just can't anticipate for, so it definitely helps to be a bit more flexible with your timing and just have a bit of an open mind and just kind of wing it and see how it goes. So I feel like I have pretty much covered all the basics. I'm just thinking whether I've missed anything. Oh, actually, so if you're camping, try and keep the boot as organized as possible. And I know I did mention this before about keeping, like, you know, the passenger seat and the front seat nice and organized, but the same applies to the boot, because you're going to be in and out all the time, especially if you're camping. You're going to have loads and loads of gear. So what we did when we went on our trip a few years ago is we got 2 big boxes, and we had one box for food items like crisps and bread and condiments and all that stuff that didn't need to stay cool, and then we had another box for all of our camping cooking essentials, so like our stove, washing up liquid, utensils, plates, towels, all that kind of thing. And it just made life so much easier because everything had a home. We could just lift out the boxes when we needed them, put them back when we didn't need them, and it just made life so much easier. So you could either use a cardboard box, or you could get one of those like plastic boxes that has a lid. That would probably be even better. And I found that to be really, really useful to have. I will leave a few links in the description box to my travel planning video, and also to a few blog posts I've written about road tripping and also traveling around the Rockies. I've written lots of content about traveling to like Banff, Jasper and Yoho, so I'll leave some links down below if you want to go and check those out. I really hope that you found this useful. If you want to see more of my videos, please hit the red subscribe button, and if you're planning a road trip, then have fun planning everything, have fun on the trip. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next one. Bye!